The Kurziks and Luxons were bitter enemies, but their greatest champions, Saint Victor and Archimedes, united to help slay Shiro the Betrayer at the cost of their own lives. Vindicators call upon the strength of their legendary alliance, channeling both heroes' skills to devastate their enemies and protect their allies. They use greatswords to deliver massive attacks and crush foes by leaping straight into battle instead of dodging.
All right, let's get into the skills. So, as Indigo said, we have the legendary Alliance stance, which is the name of the Revenant legend here. We've seen like Dwarf and Demon in the past. This is the Alliance, Archimedes and Saint Victor. Also, a quick shout out to everyone in the chat who voted for Kurziks being the best, because it's not even close. I can't even imagine. Can't even imagine the alternative. But basically, the idea of this spec is that you have kind of this dual-sided Alliance stance. And I mean, basically the entirety of the brainstorming meeting is, you know what's better than one legend? Two legends. And all right, thought about it, did some math, called in some professional mathematicians, and they did confirm that two is in fact greater than one.
Yes!
And so we decided to go with the double legend alliance stance. So basically how this works is we're going to see, right now I'm kind of in the Archimedes Luxon side of things. And once I fire off, we'll get into these skills in a second, but notice how I use the heal skill in Archimedes, now it flips over to the Kurzik side of that, goes on cooldown. And so this is going to create kind of like an interesting dynamic in gameplay and how you decide to either go on the aggressive or go on the offensive or kind of mitigate damage and support your teammates, because we're going to see a lot of offense on Archimedes, a lot of defense and support on Saint Victor. So let's just get into the skills real quick. I'm going to turn off cooldowns because that makes this demo a lot more exciting. But we're going to see some common themes between the two skills, some mechanical themes between the two skills that share the same slot. And turns out for the heal skill, they both heal you. It makes sense. That's not super surprising. Starting off with Selfish Spirit, which is the Archimedes side here. This is going to be, it's going to be like just a self-heal. It's also going to hit nearby enemies. So another common theme we're going to see both here on Archimedes and as well in the Greatsword kit is that the Vindicator really wants to be in these larger fights. So we see in the past stuff like Shiro and Sword Main Hand are more about isolating a single target and maximizing kind of that assassin-y gameplay and just focusing down a single key target. Whereas we're going to see with Archimedes, we're going to see the Greatsword just more natural, large AoE cleaving attacks. And so there with the Archimedes heal, we saw that hitting multiple enemies gives me might stacks per enemy struck, also applies vulnerability, gives me a little bit extra healing. So again, get into range with all those targets, hit as many as you can, and get the maximum value of that skill. Moving over to the other side of that is going to be Selfless Spirit. So a little fun naming conventions there. And so Selfless Spirit, nothing too crazy going on. It's just going to be that AoE heal, going to heal yourself if I do die here. And I forgot to note that myself, but that's fine. We'll just fix that real quick and flip back over here. But so we're going to heal myself, heal my allies, and that's going to, I mean, nothing too crazy here. AoE support skill. Moving into the next slot, we're going to see Nomad's Advance. So the common theme of this slot is they're going to be mobility. Archimedes, Nomad Advance is going to go in, pretty good damage on the skill, give some might per target struck again, hit as many targets as you can, get maximum value out of that skill. Then that's going to flip over to Battle Dance, which is going to be kind of the more disengage, evasion half of this, which is also going to give resistance and regeneration to yourself and nearby allies. So again, more supporty and just that backwards mobility as opposed to the engage mobility of Nomad's Advance. Next up, we're going to see Scavenger Burst. So this is going to be, the common theme here is going to have some endurance gain. That'll play in really well with the Profession mechanic, which I'll talk about right after we get through the Alliance skills. Some of you have noticed there's no divider pip here on the endurance bar. That is, we kind of talked about that a little bit in the preview video and some of the text that we've kind of shown to the world already, where the Vindicator does only have access to a single dodge, and that's going to consume all of your endurance, and no recharge is going to give me some energy back, but that's not going to happen for real players. So giving some extra endurance and gain throughout the kit here. We're going to see some of that in the traits as well. That's really going to enable kind of that singular dodge to not fall off too hard in areas where you want multiple dodges. So Scavenger Burst also going to give you quickness per target struck, in addition to just being a damaging ability. So hit a bunch of targets, get a lot of quickness, get some damage. and get some endurance back. And that's going to flip over onto the Luxon side with Tree Song, or Kurzik side rather, Tree Song.
How dare you.
I'm going to walk out now. I can't,
Bye.
can't be here anymore.
Okay, but do this first.
We'll get through this real quick. So Tree Song, this is again more that supporty, this ranged ability, similar kind of radius. This is going to give you endurance per ally affected by this, and also per condition. This is a 5 Condi cleanse per ally. Number of allies affected and the number of conditions cleansed is going to give you more and more endurance. So we just hop out here, not cheat endurance, lose some endurance here. I'm going to be cleansing 5 conditions from all of these guys. It's going to give me a pretty good amount of endurance back. Also going to heal per condition removed there as well. Finally, moving into the stun break slot, we're going to start with Reaver's Rage. So again, this is going to be a skill that you really want to hit the maximum number of targets. You're going to get some extra value from the skill. So it's going to be PBOE damage, give you some stability initially, give you some fury initially, but then per target struck, that's going to scale up. So we see we just got 6-7 stability stacks, as well as a pretty solid fury duration because we are hitting the maximum number of targets here. Then that's going to flip over into Awakening. And so the cool, I guess the more unique stun break aspect of Awakening is that it actually breaks stun for your allies. And additionally, you see it gives a little bit of stability and a solid protection duration to all those allies in range, but it's also the kind of shared stun break that we've seen on a few skills across the game. This felt like a really good spot to give that, that shared stun break mechanic, so that's going to be what you get from Awakening here. Then moving into the Elite slot, we're going to have, I guess these are a bit more divided in terms of mechanics. These are more the iconic artifacts that you might be familiar with of these characters. The Spear of Archimedes here. This skill is not all that complicated. It's just a very, very powerful, super long range, 2,000 range, long distance, very high damage multiplier, a little bit of torment in there, just super focused on maximizing the damage. Archimedes does a lot of the heavy lifting himself with the cast time. Revenant only has a little bit of a cast time, and then Archimedes will stand there, charge it up, throw at the target, and do a lot of damage to that enemy. That's going to flip over into the Urn of St. Victor, which this is again going to be more of that supporty, ally supporty. I keep saying supporty. That's not a good thing. But let's come over here to some of these golems here that are a little bit lower on health. So what's going to happen with the Urn of St. Victor? Let's just hover the tooltip for a second here. See all the things that are going on. So the first thing that's going to happen is while you're channeling the urn, which is upkeep skill, -10 upkeep, this is going to start dealing damage yourself, but you also see that allies nearby are being healed. So while you're in kind of this upkeep, it's not really a stance, but upkeep mode, the Revenant will not be able to take incoming healing either. So you're creating this really kind of dangerous, high risk, high reward type of gameplay where as long as you channel this, you're going to be kind of more susceptible to damage. You do get a little bit of damage reduction in there for both power and condition damage, so you'll be a little bit more tanky but not be able to sustain yourself at all. And then this is going to continuously pulse heal toward allies, and then as you see here on the final flip over skill, you can recast this ability to then have a more final burst of healing and some boons that's going to scale based off how low your health is. So this is something that you can kind of, if you're already low, you can just pop it when you're low health and then fire it off immediately to get the full value of the skill. Otherwise, you're going to have to sit there, take that kind of incoming damage, incoming pressure to really get your health to as low as it possibly can to get the maximum healing and the maximum boons there. We saw regen, resistance, and protection. A lot of good power coming out from that elite skill. And so that's kind of the high-level view of the Alliance stance. So when it comes to more like realistic gameplay scenarios, you see like if I use the selfish spirit on the Luxon side of things, now I'm kind of in this position where, all right, my skills are starting to flip into kind of the alternate modes, and maybe I'm more interested in only dealing damage because damage is great. I just want to kill the boss as fast as possible. I don't want to waste energy. I don't want to waste time casting these more defensive supporty skills because I'm going to play like Alliance plus Shiro or Alliance plus Jalis and go for that really aggressive build. And so we're going to see here on the F2 skill, Alliance Tactics, this is going to be an opportunity for you to kind of pick and choose when you flip over those abilities outside of just casting them. So if you do just want to maximize damage, maybe you fire off all of the Archimedes skills, and then without having to deal with the St. Victor side of these things, we're going to just fire off Alliance tactics, and that's going to flip your whole bar back. So anything that's in Arkham side is going to flip to St. Victor and vice versa. So if you're like already going to hybrid state of the bar, you're going to have a hybrid state on the other direction. This ability also gives you endurance, and it does cost energy, so this is an opportunity to convert energy into endurance, and that's going to be one of the things you really need to be kind of min-maxing while you're playing this character, because again, the dodge mechanic is going to kind of enable some of your damage or support depending on which one you choose. We'll get into the traits a little bit later in the show. But we're going to see a few different flavors of the Vindicator dodge, similar to what Daredevil does, where you can kind of pick and choose based off your Grandmaster trait. If you want to go super high damage, more supporty, or something a little bit in the middle with some wounds and a little bit of damage. So you have the opportunity to, depending on how much energy you spend on your skills, maybe you want to get Charge Mists over an Invocation to really maximize how much energy you have while you're swapping between legends. That's going to allow you to take Alliance tactics and kind of get that endurance back while also min-maxing the gameplay style you want to get out of Alliance stance. Because you also have potentially the option to run a more supportive style, maybe Ventari plus Alliance, and then really focus on these Victor side skills and just make sure you're casting those. Don't care as much about Arkham in that case, and then you're going to be really wanting to take advantage of Alliance tactics to flip over those skills whenever you feel the need to. So I'll just touch on the dodge again real quick. We'll get into the kind of key details once we get back into the traits, but as you can see, this is a pretty long, this is the super aggressive offensive dodge that I have slotted right now. So you see it's going to give me a buff to outgoing damage, and outside of that, this is a much slower, more telegraphed, much longer evade frame, but also a pretty significant amount of damage here at the end. And we've definitely seen like how a single dodge plays with Mirage since we've made that change in PvP and World v World for a while now. So when we're building the Vindicator, we want to make sure that all of these dodges feel rewarding enough to justify kind of that increased danger of not being able to dodge multiple times in a row. Obviously, we've seen some defensive cooldowns on the Alliance stance. Shiro has access to that. Jal is going to get some damage mitigation. So Revenant does have a lot of tools that can kind of mitigate damage outside of their dodge, and we felt that it was a really interesting place to kind of try the single dodge mechanic again and see if Revenant is something that can also make that work. So next we're going to move into the Greatsword skills, and kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, where this is very much more that AoE cleaving power DPS weapon that's going to complement Sword pretty well if you're just looking for like a PvE damage rotation, but also just for those larger fights, maybe in World v World environment, PvP team fights, open world, looking to hit as many targets as you can, then the Greatsword's going to be really a valuable choice. So nothing too crazy here on the auto attack, pretty standard Greatsword auto attack. The final hit applies chill, so a little bit of staying power, a little bit of chase down, which is what melee characters like to see. Moving into Mist Unleashed. This is kind of the main damage payoff of the kit. Skill 2, pretty standard damage and vulnerability. Then skill 3, Phantom's Onslaught. This is going to be another gap closer. We saw some in the Alliance stance side of things, but we also have here on the Greatsword. Dash in, probably need a target, so you actually want to hit something. You can just fire that skill off without a target and dash, similar to Rush. We cleaned up, this is actually using a slightly different animation from Rush, so it's a little bit less likely to fly out in random directions, which I'm sure all the Warrior players in chat can kind of, grumble and complain about, because anyone who's played with Greatsword and Rush and has ended up on the wrong side of the map because their enemy was moving in a weird direction. That's going to be a little bit less of an issue here with Phantom's Onslaught. So that's also going to be a little bit more chill in this kit. Next up, we have Imperial Guards. This is a defensive cooldown here. It's going to be a channel block. And the kind of unique aspect of this is that you see it flips over into, I believe it's called True Strike here. This is just another damaging ability, so you can just kind of double tap this to get a little bit of extra damage in there. That's not going to be ideal because the mechanic of Imperial Guard is that as long as you are blocking attacks, that is going to charge up the damage of True Strike. So we see what is the damage here, about 3k there, but if this golem actually uses, say, rapid fire on me, and I block a lot of incoming attacks, that's going to charge up True Strike, and we're going to see, well, I forgot to crit, so huge misplay. But the damage does increase by a pretty significant amount there. And then finally, we're going to get Eternity's Requiem. This is kind of the big, I guess it's another big damaging skill. This one's a little bit more high variance. It's another thing where you're going to want to be surrounded by a large cluster of enemies, because this is going to be kind of similar to skills in the past we've seen with like Meteor Shower, Frostbow 4, there's a little bit of this Lightning Hammer where it's just this large cluster of spawning spells in the area around you, and so it has the similar mechanic of like damage reduction per hit, because we don't want to just get really unlucky and you got hit by somehow you got hit by all 24 impacts, which I would be impressed. Send me the VOD. I'll give you a high five or something if you get hit by all 24 hits with this skill. But again, just gonna kind of have that same meteor shower mechanic. And importantly, that you're going to see that when the golem uses this skill here, this is going to be a little bit more telegraphed because it's a little bit hard to see all those impacts, right? But here, for all of the enemies, they're going to be able to see that, okay, here's all these damage radii that I need to avoid. So that's just the Great Sword kit, a little bit of mobility, a little bit of defense, a lot of cleaving AoE damage, and that's really all there is to the Vindicator, but it's a very flexible character because of the kind of dual nature of the Alliance stance. You're going to be able to potentially run a few different builds with this character, whether it's pure offense or pure support or the kind of the in-between hybrid. There's a lot of possibilities, so it's going to be really interesting to see like what all you guys do in the beta and when you get your hands on this. All right, I'm back on the Vindicator. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this build. It's just one of the default loadouts for the character that we build internally, but a lot of people complained about, and rightfully so, complained from the first beta live stream where these were all empty trait slots and there was just a bunch of flashing objects on the stream, really annoying. So we're fixing that up for this one. Notably, we're going to talk about traits. We're not going to do like a super deep dive. I mean, we'd be here for hours. Probably don't want to do that. Some people want to go home.
I mean, eventually.
We'll save that for a later date. Like we're gonna run through the traits for sure. I'll talk a little bit about what the goals for these traits are. But we don't want to just talk for hours and hours about individual traits too much, but we will cover everything to make sure that all that information is out there. So starting off with balance, let's start off with the minor traits. Balance in Discord. This says, gain health and boons when swapping legends, or by using alliance tactics. So that's the F2 skill that we talked about earlier. So every time that I'm swapping legends, pretty standard gameplay for the Revenant, gonna get a little bit of healing in there, and a little bit of regen. So it's a pretty solid sustain trait. And we're gonna see kind of, as we touched on earlier, this is very much a more hybrid opportunity for this character to be either that more aggressive or that more sustainy. So we're going to see kind of a mix of both of those things in the traits. Next up, we have Empire Divided, Grandmaster damage trait. The power is only going to be applied if you have over 50% health. When you're below that threshold, it's going to give you increased healing power, enable you to sustain back up and get back into that power bonus threshold. Next, I'm actually going to go to the Grandmaster traits because we touched on it a little bit earlier where these are defining how the dodge works for the Vindicator. Currently, I have the top one equipped, Forerunner of Death. So there's actually a variable amount of endurance depending on how much, or depending on which of these you have equipped. It all kind of looks the same because we just have the one bar, but notably, Forerunner of Death actually increases your endurance pool, so you have 150, a little bit slower to charge because it is this kind of massive damage payoff, which is more exciting to look at if you can see an enemy on my screen. But this also gives you this buff here, Forerunner of Death, which is outgoing strike damage increased. So you're really going to be wanting to maximize endurance enough so that you're able to chain this kind of off cooldown. 15-second duration on this. You want to make sure that you kind of get those chained together so you always have access to that 15-second damage bonus. I'm going to come back to the middle one because that's kind of the in-between. Over here on the bottom we have Saint of Zuhelzer, and this is going to be the more supporty kind of healing dodge option. And so this one actually reduces your max endurance, which is a good thing for this character because now you only have to build up 50 endurance in order to kind of maximize the value or to fire off these skills again, fire off this dodge again. As we see in the tooltip, this is going to apply barrier, apply healing, and then also give you personally an outgoing healing bonus. So it's going to play well with some of the heals we saw in the Victor side of things, and also very well with Ventari, where getting access to this healing bonus is going to really enable that support playstyle. And this one also potentially just a very good option for competitive modes because that lower endurance cap is a little bit more easy to, and that's exciting, a little bit easier to upkeep, right? Finally, we're going to move into the middle, Imperial Impact, Vassals of the Empire. This is kind of that more in-between. We're going to see a little bit of damage here, some condition applications, some boon applications, and boon extension. So this character is not really intended to be a boon support, but as you're probably going to be playing with a boon support in your party, this is going to give a little bit of extra value to that composition and that it's going to extend any of those boons in addition to giving protection and might. Obviously that buffs allies in range, but this will also hit enemies in range and apply a couple of conditions to them, just as kind of that in-between, more of that mid-rangey, very flexible playstyle. You might choose to slot this trait for your dodge. That one's going to keep you at the baseline of 100 endurance. Now we can come back to the adept traits, starting with Leviathan Strength. This one says F2. We should probably change the text so it says Alliance Tactics, Carl. Shout out to Carl.
Carl.
So Alliance Strength. F2 now refreshes the cooldowns of Alliance utility skills. And this also increases the cooldown of Alliance Tactics itself. And so the value of this skill is that in those cases where you're trying to make maybe that single-sided playstyle of the Alliance stance, where I'm firing off all of my Archimedes skills, all I care about is damage. I'm just firing off my Archimedes skills, firing off my Archimedes skills, firing off my Archimedes skills, and then I'm going to flip fire Alliance Tactics. That's going to then refresh the cooldown. That's actually bugged on Selfish Spirit. That's cool. Didn't refresh the cooldown there, but it should refund the cooldown of all those abilities, and then obviously it's still gated by energy cost, but just makes those instantly available if you feel the need to. If not, you may choose to go for next Amnesty of Xingje. And so a lot of these trait names actually have a lot of lore tie-ins that are way over my head, so that's cool. I can't talk too much about those, but I know we did a lot of research about, maybe Indigo wants to talk about some of these things. This was totally not planned, so I'm just flipping the script. Let's
no script.
doing it live.
Surprise!
What's going on here? Maybe we'll talk a little bit about more of the kind of the narrative behind that. Maybe a little bit separate show, or if we have time at the end, maybe we can come back to it. Amnesty of Xingje. Anyway, this basically says that your legendary alliance abilities gain additional boons. Cool. So every time I use an Archimedes skill, it's going to give might. Every time I use a Victor skill, it's going to give regen. Nothing too crazy, honestly, just very thematic for those characters. Adept traits don't really need to be super high power level, but instead just keeping them pretty simple, pretty thematic to the characters. Next up we have Redemptor's Sermon. So this is going to struck below the health threshold. This is a mechanic we've seen in the past on a few traits. This one's going to do just a little bit of healing, a little bit of Connie Cleanse. So if you really feel the need to have those kind of increased defensive options, I guess you could slot that trait if you really want to. Let's move along, though, and move into Reaver's Curse. So it says, gain endurance for each target affected by your dodge. And so as we saw in the few different flavors of the dodge for the Vindicator, some of them affect allies, some of them affect enemies, some of them affect, or one of them affects both. And so in the case where you affect both, it's going to give you endurance back per target affected, whether it's empowering an ally or hitting an enemy. So there's potentially a lot of endurance gain if you are hitting the maximum number of targets. And the common theme we're going to see here in the Master Tier Traits slot is these are all going to be endurance gain. We talked about this earlier. Endurance very important for this character. So moving on to some name I can't pronounce. Indigo, can you help me out here?
Which one?
This trait right.
Oh my goodness. We just went over this the other day.
We're locking in the pronunciation
We're
here.
locking in pronunciations on the spot. Live.
Wait, what is? I can't
live,
see.
live story breaking.
Spell it. I can't see it.
Angsiyan.
Yeah, I'm done.
Apostrophe S. Someone's trust is the theme of. That's just a huge disaster.
Are we blaming Carl for this too?
Carl.
It's probably my fault here that I am not well versed enough in the lore to know this character. But anyway, if you have the trust of this individual, or hopefully it's an individual, this is going to grant you endurance in an area when you swap legends or when you fire off alliance tactics. So this one's a little bit more of a reliable endurance gain. This one is reliant on being around enemies, being around allies. This one's just going to be value regardless, because you're always going to be swapping legends, you're always going to be activating alliance tactics. Finally, we have Song of Arboreum. So this one's going to be increased vigor effectiveness, also going to give you vigor. So we'll actually rush over here into Invocation real quick. Spirit Boon is going to give you vigor when entering Archimedes, and Song of the Mist proc for Archimedes is going to give you endurance per hit, so more endurance, more vigor. And that's going to play really nicely with Song of Arboreum, which has increased vigor effectiveness. So this is another different source of endurance generation for this character. That's actually all of them because I already went over the Grandmaster traits, so that's exciting. So that wraps up the Vindicator. That's everything there is to know about the Vindicator. Obviously, there's a lot more once you guys jump in and dive into it in game.